I have an interesting but difficult topic, and I'm gonna, somewhat apologize for the density and complexity of it up front because it is a challenging topic, and the topic is all around meaning making and how meaning making is the foundation of building high agency. And meaning making is another fancy term for understanding how your brain operates, how your brain is thinking. And Sylvia was just asking me kind of where this came from, this topic. And spent a lot of the week coaching and helping different individuals and kept seeing this recurring challenge where when brainstorming, when trying to make sense of something, it's the unprocessed baggage, it's the unprocessed opinions that we have that was impacting the ability to properly brainstorm, the ability to navigate different topics. So let me share the slide, and then we'll kind of jump into this, and then we'll open it up for questions, discussion, and whatnot. Hopefully, it will not be too dense, but I apologize in advance. It's going to be a little bit dense. So meaning making is the foundation of high agency. I try to look for some type of graphic, some type of meme tied to this notion of having a strong opinion. Like if you have a strong opinion, and so I try to find something, and the best it found was not appropriate for the class, but it had to do with taking an opinion, basically shoving it up your ass so deep that you can't find it. And that notion of snap judgments, the notion of having an opinion, having a point of view, it is based on our experience, our past. And then, of course, the question is it accurate or not? And from the average individual, it tends not to be, unless you're consistently exercising the practice of understanding your reactions, your meaning making of things, and then the notion of challenging. So I'm going to explain this to you, but this whole notion of we have opinions, we have judgment, we have sort of meaning making of anything we see. And when you're able to actually capture what that is, you can then work on potentially changing, as in strengthening. So this is the idea that you can change your opinion with new information. And that new information, the key is to come from you as opposed to from somebody else. And it tends to usually come from somebody else. And there begins the process of creating rifts and conflict and oftentimes being triggered or startled. And there's a notion of what you can do to help prevent that yourself. So just really quick recap from last Leadership in Practice. I just pulled two slides here. It was all talking about the notion that burnout, and when you feel burnt out, in research, the number one reason why you feel burnt out is you're making an investment and you're not getting anything back in return. That could be in a business, it could be on a project, it could be in any relationship. And so what ends up happening is burnout usually leads to complacency. And complacency is when you get to a place where you go numb and you no longer want to invest. But they say in research that the single greatest form of unhappiness for human being is being burnt out. It's because you're putting energy, time, investment, you're getting nothing back in return. And so the antidote or the opposite of burnout is momentum. Now, momentum is a very interesting thing because momentum requires you to do more than one thing right. You have to have a series of right calls in a row, often in a focused direction, highly concentrated. So the sequence or the order that you do something matters. And of course, speed matters. The ability to make quick decisions, fast judgment calls. And so momentum, of course, requires a certain level of clarity and lightness in your own head and thinking. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do. So building off last week's class, I tried to first just draw last night what I think was a simple version, and this might not be so simple. So let me explain to you kind of the way I look at this. Coming from the upper left, meaning making, the pre-work to be able to brainstorm properly, get advice, feedback, a discussion with someone, is to do a two-part exercise for yourself. One is what I'm calling the default visceral draft. We've talked about visceral drafts. Visceral draft is the ability to think of a project, think about even just your own life, yourself, and no phones, no documents, no computers, but off memory, just rapidly trusting your mind to just try to capture a brain dump of what is coming out. And the more you visceral draft on anything, what you will find over time is you build skills of getting more alert. Alert being you'll notice the nuances in details, because the more you're trying to like drive and understand what my brain is thinking, what my point of view is in something, you over time will not only get better, but you will become more alert. As people were visceral drafting, which is why I'm calling it the default visceral draft, there's a need to build a skill of self-challenging your own draft. And your own draft is identifying the high points and low points where you have a stronger opinion, to say, maybe the opposite of that opinion is true. Maybe that opinion is not correct. And why this becomes important is that as everything has gotten more complex, more uncertain out there, if we're able to self-lower our certainty in our views from the past, it plays a dramatic role in you navigating better into the future. So one of the simple examples I put here is when you do something in a gated fashion, you do something once and it turns out really great, awesome. And the instant thing you might do is, okay, I'm going to blast it out to everyone. Versus when you lower your certainty, you might say, that was awesome. I'm going to send it out to 5 people. And that notion of just having that little extra bit of caution, because just because it was awesome what happened now, it's not predictive of what might happen if you go out further. So there's a notion of just self-challenging lower certainty. So I'll kind of cover this more. The diagram in the middle represents, if you think of like mission as a way to think of every project in the world and every project you might be in, what matters most are the projects that you are within it. So which is why self is itself a project in itself within the world of the mission. And the mission is made up of many little, like kind of submissions, pieces in the machine. So the example I used in the self and why kind of where you want to always start in the self is when you think of anything about yourself, there are lessons we have going to the past. And to be able to capture the lesson first, whether it's a lesson of something went wrong, so I have a solution against it, or it might be something that worked really well. It might be like the best examples of success you can remember. And you have both the negative and the positive, but we tend to walk around with a lot of certainty that lesson is correct. And that thing that worked well, you might say that was one of the best things that happened on, last year, this year. And it sets a standard for success, and it sets sort of almost an automatic reaction to when something is wrong, what to do. And to be able to capture that first before you challenge it. So we'll kind of go into some more detail. So this was my simple version. So you're going to see it's going to get more complicated. But all right, so I'm going to kind of go into what AI Coach, which is a AI tool we built, kind of analyzing all the leadership and practice classes. This is 264th leadership and practice. So it's been trained on sort of all the material going back 5 years. And so when I was asking AI Coach to help me summarize what I was teaching here, this is the way AI Coach returned on this topic. So here's what's happening. Your brain doesn't just record experiences, it assigns meaning to them. Now, the speed that our mind is doing this is much faster than we often think. And that meaning becomes the lens through which you interpret everything that follows it. And this is the notion of confirmation biases. We tend to, especially when we think we figured something out or have meaning on something, what gets added on top gets added on very quickly. And the danger isn't the experience itself, but it's when you're starting to add meanings in an unconscious way. And so I'll go into a little bit in this example of what I mean by hurtful meaning. We're going to go through this notion of how to take hurtful meaning and turn it into a helpful meaning. And the reason why this is important is going forward, you want to always increase your odds of winning, increase your odds of success. When you have hurtful meaning baked in your thinking, in your logic, in your mental models, we often don't realize that we are the source of hurting our own selves. And how we do that mentally is the key to unpack this. So couple things here. Let's see. Pattern recognition is what the brain does best. our brain in many ways is not that different than how LLMs or AI is trained, but we have our own version, right? Our life experience and things that blip in our life, good or bad, is where we make meaning very quickly. We tend to put meaning, and then because of that meaning, we are starting to now pattern recognize. It's almost like a magnet. It looks for anything that's close to it and just starts adding it rapidly. So when that initial core magnet of bad that we learn a lesson from or good has all kinds of incorrect interpretations in it, it doesn't know that. It just keeps adding on. So one of the examples here is this, looking at the past, our default visceral reaction will create a narrative when you look back in time, right? And the question isn't, is it true? See, this is the part often we spend time on accuracy. Is it true? Is it not true? It's less important if it's true or not. It's just more important for you to be able to see it first before you then analyze, is it helpful or hurtful? And so I'll give you an example here just from something Megan had sent me when she was away. This notion of a mental prison, right? You know, when you say something hurtful, like I always fail at this. So whatever this might be, you end up building a mental prison, and these prisons are very strong. And so the ability to challenge and get out of it is important. But this is a nuance that kind of matters, that a mental prison isn't always negative. Oftentimes, if you're over positive on something, right? Like that was the best thing that happened. That was the best example of success. We can often think that it's always going to be easy in something like that. It's like if a combination of factors makes it that we tend to succeed, say like you have a brainstorm session in the morning and it becomes easy, or you have a brainstorm session with somebody and it works out well. Our belief might be that, well, it always works out well in the morning, or always works out well with that individual. So we go into easy mode, despite that most of life is kind of pretty hard, and it's filled with obstacles. And I'll create this notion of an obstacle course is what we face in most things, but we might quickly say positive, match it up. And so we expect it to be easy going forward. So we'll cover this in more detail, but I want to share this little piece. So Megan sent me this, and it was a study in 1946. There was a psychiatrist who survived the camps and revealed the truth that most people never realize. You don't suffer from the events, you suffer from the meaning you give them, right? So that he called it the meaning making code. And so this is the topic of hurtful versus helpful meaning making. And there's a skill that you may have heard, the ability to reframe a situation so that you will actually, we talked last week about the notion of being lighter versus heavier, right? You can be in the exact same situation. I think Greg used a sports analogy where like a sports team might feel heavy because they're the underdogs, and every stat and every prediction is they're going to lose, and they're going to lose badly. So you feel heavy, and that heaviness, of course, makes that losing come true. How do you get someone to be light about it? And that's the reframing skill. So going into more detail, this psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, was forced into conditions designed to break the human spirit. Yet he noticed something most people miss. Some survived psychologically, some didn't. And the difference wasn't circumstance, meaning everyone was suffering. Everyone was struggling. Is the audio okay? And so this individual, Frankl, lost everything, family, home, freedom. But even in the darkest environment imaginable, he saw that people responded in completely different ways. And it's two different ways, same suffering, totally different outcomes. So when he went into the details, his notion is life doesn't break you. The interpretation of that does. And until you choose the meaning consciously, you will continue reliving the same emotional patterns. And so the meaning controls the experience. Like bad things happen, things don't work out, but what meaning you attach to it is actually how, what your mental models get built off. So on the positive versus negative front, if you look at it, we do not suffer from what happens to us. We suffer from the meaning we attach to it. Meaning is the true source of human experience. And then the flip side, here's a danger. When you give an experience a destructive meaning, And this is where destructive is not always negative. It can be positive to the point where you go into the next situation expecting it to be easy. There's a sense of like entitled easiness that you expect in front of you. Your psychology collapses around that interpretation, and the story becomes the prison. And so I'm going to give you, this notion of part one is first to be able to see your default visceral, meaning like to understand in every situation as you go through, what is my past meaning making? What are the stories? What are the narratives? What are the lessons? And to be able to see that first is what I call part one, default visceral, before you move to part two, which is to self-challenge your visceral. And I'll show you kind of techniques to do both kind of better. Part three is when you get feedback from others. We tend to jump from 1 to 3, and that creates a lot of challenges. It's what usually creates triggering, startleness. One of the worst things is when you say something and then someone calls out, do you think you're hurting yourself, or do you think that's a bad way to look at it? And like that comment itself might make you stop thinking. And so this notion of how do we get to part three where somebody can collaborate in my brainstorming, in my thinking, and that feedback, that reaction from them can be helpful to us as opposed to shut us down. So this is part of the topic we want to go into. I'll kind of go into sort of what AI Coach analyzed was my notes here. So, so when you look at the past, this is where meaning originates, right? So true or not true is less important than understanding eventually what's helpful versus hurtful. But before you do that, you have to be able to capture it. We often don't capture it, and we often don't expose it. So it stays buried sort of in that mental prison of ours. And the notion of helpful versus hurtful is one pathway, one interpretation will decrease your odds of winning into the future. A better pathway can help your odds of winning. And so once again, default visceral, capture the thing before you go to the portion of trying to analyze it. And think about the reframing skill is the skill of being able to like look for alternative meanings. And oftentimes, when you learn anything new, just because you tried something and it was bad. And I was thinking about food. We were talking last night about Kathy with Indian food. Her memories are very bad. And I think the notion that I think about is a lot of times when you look at children, their first impression, the first memory of food is bad. Oftentimes anything foreign to us, we might naturally have an immediate bad reaction. But this notion of kind of getting to a place where that is what tends to happen for almost everyone and everything, like new, unfamiliar tends to create a negative meaning and a negative reaction. Instead of seeing it as like bad, it might be that's just kind of how it all starts. It's like picking up any new sport and being bad at it in the beginning. That's just kind of how beginners start. And to realize that that's not about how bad I am or how uncoordinated I am. It's just kind of what start looks like. It's just an example. So we'll go into some more of this. But let's see. Let me go into some high-level context that I think will help before I go into depth of this. So this is a lot, so I apologize a little bit. But I put ABC over here. When I think from the very right, think of results. It's about generating results. Like success matters and getting the results you want, whether results are financial, whether results are usually results are when you can start to count. It's called lagging metrics. You can start to count something. And so that's where ultimately you want to get to. But to get to C, which is results, the class we taught last week, generating momentum. If you are able to string together several right calls in a row with speed, that is the ability to generate momentum. Meaning you will find constantly without action, nothing will happen. But action is not enough once. And usually what tends to happen to generate momentum is a series of small right calls in a row, tight sequence in a focused direction. And then when you start to see momentum, you have to make a bigger and bolder bet. And that combination of, several small right calls and a big bold bet, that ultimately is the kind of decision making you need to make, which is very fast. It's very it's very focused, fast, clarity, generating momentum generates results. And I put urgency here because that is something that tends to matter. Momentum tends to be a sport where you have to be on, you have to make decisions fast, and you have to make many of them. And you have to get them correct in a row. And so when I think about the urgency that we tend to all feel to get results, to make progress, to make action happen, the counterintuitive side is what's in the left, how it could feel so slow. It could feel so unproductive to be able to strategize, make a game plan, and try to brainstorm more correctly. And so I'm going to dive into the detail on the left. But before I go into there, two of the bigger common mistakes that shows up, and this is where it's all correlated to part A around strategy and game plan. When you don't brainstorm and you don't strategize, you don't game plan well, two of the biggest mistakes that tend to show up is you take action, but it's too far apart. Oftentimes, the reason why a lot of people will make recurring and similar errors is because they tried something too far apart. It might be once a quarter, it might be once a month. And because it was too far apart, they can't see a pattern of something. Like when you do things in tight sequence, you can see patterns and you can make adjustments. When you make it too far apart, a lot of people make the same mistake over and over. And then it might take months, quarters, or even years before you say, oh my God, I'm like doing the same thing. And so that pattern recognition in every action you take, if you don't do it in tight sequence, you tend not to see the actual lesson and adjustment to make. The second part, and this is something that I think is a industrial age sort of like we tend to rate productivity and how many things we check off, how much action we take. It's almost like still ingrained in our heads of being in the factory floor and you have to punch holes and you have to make widgets. So there is so much weight put on action that we don't understand nor appreciate that if you do the right effective brainstorming, you have the right effective thinking, the actual action is faster and happening in a higher burst of concentration, which is why I put what we've seen as a general pattern is 85% of the time being spent strategizing, brainstorming, and then you're punching out your action 15%. And that's a massive ratio. That's a 5 to 6x differential. So how many of us just go through and just get to action very fast when you want to be able to hold the action until you get your thinking right? And then when you do, you're punching out the action much faster. So two kind of pieces there. So think about this kind of top plan of strategy, game planning, but then there's a flip side. And we were kind of spending time this week on this, which is the daily game plan. And the daily game plan matters. You can't quite see the diagram here, but on the bottom left, this is an image we had shown before. I think the typical workday looks like you come in and you have higher energy, and it just goes like a straight line down over time, versus how to think of working in oscillations, moving up and down in energy. And so the way to think of a daily game plan is that think of working in 90-minute sprints. They're like basically intensity in bursts. And often over time, you will have a list of oscillations that might be like chores to do. It might be a workout. It might be obviously meals. And what I found effective is to take those oscillations, schedule them in as the oscillation breaks. So when you come in, you want to start almost like people usually think that you need to like warm up to get going, but you're sharper than you realize. Your mind is clearer because you haven't flooded it with emails and information. So when you get there, you take a sprint, but then you've got a list of oscillations so that you don't just keep going and going and mindlessly working, so that you're deliberately looking at a directional. And I say directional because it's never about precision, but you can almost break up your day with a list of oscillations. Kind of that's what breaks the 90-minute sprints. and a separate, what I call a to-do parking list. It's something that's pretty effective. Having just a sheet of paper, and I call it the to-do parking list. There's a lot of things that we need to do, but those things that the to-do list, if you check them off, it doesn't make any material progress in anything. You got to get to these things, but you can park it often longer than you might realize. So having a to-do list that puts it down, and you can build that list, but that's separate from this green circle of kind of this daily game plan that you want to be able to brainstorm and think. And so 3 common mistakes that show up in the daily game plan: grinding. I think this notion of you're grinding through the day, you're just mindlessly working through something. It's not making much progress. There's the other side, which is you're mindlessly going through your to-do list. And so you define your productive day as check, 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 check. And then when the day is over, and you sum up the days of just going through all the to-do lists, you'll see it doesn't really lead to generating any momentum, and it doesn't lead to ultimately results. The other part that we tend to do wrong is oscillations first. You come in and you feel antsy because your mind's kind of like, trying to come up with a breakthrough. You can't. So you go and start to just go after oscillation after oscillation. It might be watering the plants. You have a snack, then you go do a workout, and then you go do this. Before you know it, like you're almost wasting your oscillations versus using them as a strategic break across the 90-minute sprints. So I'm showing this together because where I'm going to go into more detail are the green circles. And the green circles, they kind of represent the gold and the foundation of how to brainstorm, how to actually understand. To get momentum, you have to have a game plan. And the game planning comes down to human thinking, human brainstorming. So thinking of effective brainstorming, where most of us, this is here, but most of us experience bad brainstorming. So when I think of bad brainstorming, and I was considering titling this class, How to Be an Effective Brainstormer, and it's very counterintuitive. But when I think of bad brainstorming, usually 2 things happen. It's a picture of a guy speaking with some girl, or it can just be 2 people brainstorming. Bad brainstorming where one person is trying to explain something and kind of what they're working on. And there are 2 things that tend to happen. It's very hard to react to. As in, I don't even know where to start and how to even react. And so we tend to build a lot of niceties, which can be flipping it into questions at them or whatnot, but it's very hard to know how to react to someone's thinking. The second is it can feel emotionally heavy, as in they could easily be offended, triggered, difficult topics, heavy topics, eggshells. So a lot of brainstorming sessions tend to fill up in one of these 2 things. You don't know how to react. You see something, it's all over the place, a lot of stuff. And, oftentimes it might be like, wow, that's a lot. Or it's like, there isn't an easy reaction. It's very hard to react, very hard to help, or it feels dangerous. It feels dangerous to explore the topics that it's not like kind of open season for all topics. It's like topics as long as you don't bring up certain pieces. And then it starts to constrain what you're about to do. When you are getting effective brainstorming, one of the things that happens is it's a very effective invitation into your strategy. So you're trying to strategize, you're trying to come up with something. And when you're able to explain what you're doing well, it is an invitation that's very easy. As a result of it, someone's able to collaborate with you effectively. And in the last class, by the way, we talked about cognitive empathy that came from the skills of learning how to use AI correctly at something very similar. Most human beings do not know how to collaborate with AI properly. And so there's this reverse skill. If you build this, it will help you actually collaborate with other people well, which includes AI. Good brainstorming, effective collaboration. So there's a deliberate mapping out. That's the idea of a game plan of what you want to do. There's good energy. You can get excited on it. Good brainstorming usually ends up creating discourse, arguing, debating, which will often lead to either a better outcome or an outcome that you did not see before you brainstorm. So There's messy areas that you don't quite know what to do, but it's easy to kind of go into it, proactively invite and go into it. So easy to react to, easy to discuss, no eggshells. You will save a lot of time in execution if you can even look around the corners a little bit. And one of the common things I find is when you brainstorm effectively with someone, the reaction at the end of it is almost like, wow, I did not think that's where we'll end up. That notion of you went into it, like you kind of end up in the same spot, nothing advanced, versus like, oh my God, what I thought I would do, what my idea was, completely changed by the time I was done. That notion of, oh my God, I'm self-surprised by what came out after the session. So two things I'll touch on. Sure, good.
There's some question around fan of the day, like oscillations being long versus short, and then like is there kind of a for instance of what a 90-second sprint, 90-minute sprint followed by an oscillation could look like?
So when I think of a
can you just repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question was just this: what does a 90-minute sprint look like? And this question of even the oscillations, how long an oscillation? Oftentimes, like a bathroom break is like the smallest type, but I think of something that's long enough that can sever your thinking. I was saying, for example, like in the winter, we have a lot of houseplants here that need watering. There's a lot of them. So that's a great oscillation because it's a lot of work in going to water everything. A workout, which can be 30 to 60 minutes, is a great oscillation. Something that is going to, like a great oscillation is something that is mindless in nature, but is long enough that it almost severs your thought process, so that when you come back to a problem or you come back to what you have to do, you're in a different mindset because you almost did a reboot. It's almost like doing a reboot. When I think of the 90-minute sprint, like one of the easiest ways to think about it is when you first start work in the day, think of like kind of marking the first 90 minutes. And the first 90 minutes, what you don't want to do is go into busy activity. The thing you don't want to do when you start the day is go into you can write a to-do list and park it, but you don't want to start executing against a to-do list. It's very easy to start to go into not only scanning your emails or all the, Slack or whatnot, and just start commenting, as opposed to you can scan and you can even mark things on red. But I think of the first 90-minute sprint being like, I'm going to look at like the idea of strategy, game plan. What's the important stuff that I want to move forward? As the day goes on, as the day goes on and the week goes on, we tend to lower our ambitions as things don't happen. Our ambition, we're almost greedier earlier in the day, earlier in the week. And so as we are greedy, wanting to make progress in the most important stuff, think of that 90-minute sprint in the morning, first thing, trying to attack that. And so I'll go into some of the things that you can do. And this has to do with the whole brainstorming technique that we're going to share. So so for those of you who have seen the left side diagram before, I'll just explain it really quick. We always used to refer to this as the VX, V1, 2, like kind of this wedge. Think of, I'll explain from the right side. The VX, let me do this just to help you not see this, so that, give me a second. I'm doing this on purpose so I can hide something from you. Okay. All right, so only focus on this. VX is more in geeky tech terms. V stands for version. So version 1, version 2, version 3 versus version X is somewhere in the future. Often the future tends to be directional in nature. It tends to often be fuzzy for people. This is not a mission statement. This is not like, values and whatnot. But I want you to think of it as like visuals, like the term we kept using is Eden, like Garden of Eden. What does Eden look like? And you describe different elements. And over time, it's a muscle you get better at like getting a more descriptive, more vivid movie of what Eden will look like, the future of kind of what you're trying to go to. Think of V3 as like what to do next. And this is where the game plan comes in. The game plan usually is a combination of kind of direction for the future combined with ideas of what to do next. And I put a cloud in between V3 to VX because the challenge for most people is how do I go from where I am now towards the vision I want? And that comes from taking the right actions of what to do next. And this is the series of things, which is how you generate momentum. Think of version 1 representing the past and version 2 being like the immediate past, which is the present. So, and I'll help you distinguish those two things. So just another way to look at the exact same sheet. This is, for lack of better terms, we just call this the PPF, past, present, and future. So it's a way to take a sheet of paper and just chop it up. So you can create 3 columns. One is the past, the second is the present, the third is the future, and then at the bottom, it's action. So if I use the V1, V2, VX versus V3, and why this is important is the most common mistake that we tend to see people make is they go into brainstorming like a debate that you engage someone on your VX, as well as a debate on what to do next, V3. So instead of, kind of like, so what happens is this is a very common like situation that shows up. You're trying to have a discussion, trying to explain to someone what you want to do, and how you invite them into your strategy is a discussion of what to do next. And you start debating, what do you think we should do next? Or it goes into, what do you want to get out of this? As in, where do you see it go? What's your like goal? What's your objective? And so you end up brainstorming this very shallow, it's a very weak, like almost pontificating debate. And it gets very frustrating. It gets very frustrating for the person who's spending their mind share trying to help you. But it also gets even more frustrating for yourself, where you're like, kind of like, sometimes it's like simplistic ideas. Sometimes it literally feels like you're just playing word syntax. You're just bouncing like, I have an idea, I have an idea, I have an idea. Use this word, use that word. And so the counterintuitive nature of brainstorming is the pre-work you have to do is not coming up with your list of the action or the future, the V3 or VX, but it's understanding how to explain your past and present. And so this is the part of the exercise we're going to kind of cover here. So first, 2 things to keep in mind, the word knowing and trying. And so I pulled a slide from an old leadership in practice class 199. I thought it was one of the more insightful things we had found. It was tied with Andrew Huberman that was talking about with this expert about addiction and this notion of the way you get over any addiction is the first thing is you have to actually decide, as in know, this is a notion of awareness, that you have a serious problem. And so this will be very similar here in the notion of the meaning in the past we have to know that it's not fully accurate, but it's there. Like knowing and just kind of the act of constantly trying to know, which is why it's knowing, is an ongoing practice. And that's part 1. The second part is the trying, like a genuine attempt of trying to turn it from hurtful to helpful. And the act of doing part 1 and part 2, the knowing and trying and knowing and trying, it sums up over time into a skill. And so this is the backup I'm going to use to explain what we're going to cover here. So when I think of brainstorming and I think about what I showed you and kind of the V1, V2 as in the past and the present, the first thing you have to be able to do is to actually capture and almost see how you think. You have to see your own opinion. You have to see your own judgment, what it's made of. And this notion of oftentimes when you see it, it will be cringeworthy. You will start to instantly correct it. And so it's not about correcting it, but about seeing what's in there before you go into this act of fixing it. And so one kind of framework you could take is this. The past has good and bad. The present, and the reason why I put momentum versus heaviness is oftentimes you need a lighter way, because in the present, it's often too soon to tell if it's really that bad or if it's good. And so as a result of it, the good and the bad from the past it's more definitive. It's got a label. In the present, because it's still in motion, it's often too early to tell, which is why it's easier to break it up into a list of where you believe there's momentum versus there's heaviness. Now, at the bottom, I put this here. It's kind of a very important part. All data comes from the past, and data informs, but data is not predictive of the future, which I know is not something that people think about. When you think about data, most of us are trained to believe data is predictive of the next thing in the future. When you think of anything logical, it's how LLMs and AI got built. Like, it's looked at word combinations and it's figured out what the next word is going to be. And so on logical items, that works. But when you look at most things in life, just because you've seen something before, you're assuming life is too easy and too repetitive. This notion of why data is not predictive. If you go through life thinking it's that easy a game, just because you've seen it, the same thing's going to happen. That's where you get killed. It's where you get surprised, where you get startled, because you weren't ready to play hard mode. You were going into it saying, I've seen enough, and the same thing is going to repeat. And you'll see very quickly through experience that's not true. So as a result of it, we're walking around with mental models that are kind of too amateur, too like, it's belief that I've kind of seen everything, and then now I can predict what's going to happen. It's not true. So what I put on the left, just to people we coached, one way to think of the past is you can use the calendar. We're getting to the end of the year. It's a good way to look at the whole year, and then it makes you think about even previous years. You can think of things by people, examples of good, bad relationships, experiences, and details. You can also think of certain projects or your life in chapters, but just kind of ways to think of those things, then put into past and present. So using that frame, I'm going to get a little more dense here, but part one, visceral draft. Part two is going to be self-challenging. The key is do not do both at the same time. And you'll see how automatically you'll want to do both. Now, what I put at the bottom is interesting. Oftentimes when you see someone who's a very good coach, they have what they call probing skills. Probing skills is just another fancy word for prompt engineering. They're really good at asking and probing into the right topics. As a result of it, you can take someone who wasn't sharing a lot of detail and they managed to extract all the right relevant points. And so a lot of times people have asked over the years, how do you build better probing skills? The way you build better probing skills is actually by repping yourself. Part one, as in your default visceral draft, versus part two, your self-challenging of your own draft. And I'll explain to you how that leads to good probing skills, because if you're doing it to yourself, you'll be able to actually do it to others as well. This diagram, I was lazy, so I didn't redraw it, but it was a conversation we had where think of the pyramid on the left of high, mid, and low. When we think about our visceral draft off memory, what tends to come out is high level points. And then if you don't like it, you might go right to the right side and start debating it or fixing it. So high level points start to get fixed right away. But the key is whatever high level point you have to go down into a low level of detail, and you want to capture what's coming off memory. As in like play the little video clips and movies that pop up. And oftentimes we tend to think we don't, but the more you practice, you will be surprised how much is underneath, because the brain is pattern matching. So it's gone through and matched up things, and it can go really far back. It might go before you're 18, it might go some other, and we made sense of experiences and we strung it together as if it's telling one strategy and one story. And it tends to have a lot of flaws in it. So when you go into part one, visceral drafting, the key is this: visceral drafts are powerful because it's very fast. Because it's off memory, and because you're not using aids of computers and looking up stuff, don't look at calendars. It doesn't matter if it's inaccurate. What matters is whatever is pulling off memory, you want to capture it. because that memory that's coming out is the very thing that's driving your opinion, driving your judgment and decisions. So I was saying, even when you have a strong opinion, like that doesn't matter, that's a strong opinion. Anything that you have a snap judgment and opinion on, you want to be able to move from like a low calorie or a sort of level thinking to like high levels of details, like, and try to get as many as possible. And you'll see the more you do, and you have to dig a lot, you get better at it. And why I put probing skills part one, oftentimes when you're trying to coach someone and trying to understand how to help them, the act of the first part of probing is being able to push where someone has a point of view, but they leave it at a high level point, which is low calorie summary. There's stories behind it, and trying to dig into those stories, you're learning to do that for yourself. This is from the AI coach. Remember that everything you experienced, if it registered, right, in your data bank, it means you interpret it and put meaning to it. And then we started to pattern recognize and added other things, thinking they're very similar, if not the same experiences. Before we try to fix it, you have to be able to pull out those experiences, like down to like nuance, detail, and story. And so this notion that to be effective in brainstorming, because ultimately, the richer your list of V3, what to do next, right? It's great when you have a whole list of ideas of what you want to do. And so you have so many good ideas, you have to prioritize and choose not to do a lot. That's a good place to be. It's where the future is so vivid, it's compelling, it's exciting, it draws even others into wanting to build this Eden with you, or maybe even kind of like support you. That's where you want to get to. And it's counterintuitive, the core effective place so that you can invite discussion is first being better at understanding where your own thinking comes from. What stories, what pieces are in there. So the first part is what I call the default visceral draft. How do I pull it out? How do I capture it? How do I paper it so I can see it? And when you first start to do this, you will get very reactive in almost being judgmental on yourself. But remember, it's not about being right or wrong. It's not about being a little shallow or a little too opinionated. It's just a matter of capturing. That is what it is. And so you need to be able to capture it. You need to be able to see it. Now I'm going to move to part two. Part two is when you now are able to take your visceral draft and you're going to self-analyze it, as in you're going to self-challenge any part that you have a strong opinion on. A good lesson, success. And without the self-challenge, what you'll see is that the whole notion of it's very hard for someone to brainstorm with you. It's hard for them to react. It's hard for them to not offend you. So you want to knock those out. And I'm giving over here some of the top 5 errors of how people do the challenging incorrectly. So the most obvious one is the blunt flip-flop. You know, you see something negative and you just turn it into a positive. And it's not as simple as that. Like seeing that I had a bad experience with certain kind of food or certain sport, just because the first time doesn't mean that it was actually, well, I should see it as like, you know, a good experience because I tried. It's not about flip-flopping. So being blunt and being flip-floppy when you actually see different things, that's usually a signal of a low muscle in self-challenging your visceral drafts. There is a sense of being burned out, right? Kind of, I wasted time. I wasted the whole year. It could feel like I wasted my life. Those thoughts can come up a lot when you look at this. The whole nothing goes right is connected to should be easier. Your expectation is easy mode, not hard mode. Often things are emotionally heavy, and then very strong common mistakes of inaccurate weightings. There's too much meaning put in the past, where oftentimes it worked just through a combination of 3 or 4 things coming together at once, almost by chance. And the key is you want to turn it strategic, but what happened in the past might not have as much meaning as you think. In the present, the momentum or the heaviness, we might be overweighting it when it's often too soon to tell. So kind of this notion of when you do this right, you're going to get more curiosity, flexibility, agility, adaptability. And so I'm going to show you sort of a little more detail of how to think of the opposite of the common mistakes. Often when you come up with blunt, like challenging of your initial meaning making, I think getting to a place of recognizing it's always more complicated. A lot of things usually work or don't work because of a combination of many things happening at once. It's like accumulated things occurring, which is why the right, wrong, good, bad recognition tends to be too blunt. It's not recognizing the nuances of how there was a podcast analyzing Charlie Munger's like sort of it was like the top mistakes that he saw people make just over the years. And the single biggest blind spot is people don't analyze many things coming together at once or happening at once. Everything is a singular variable analysis. And most things in life is a combo platter of different variables coming together. The whole wasted my life feeling, right? That's the burnout. This notion of recognizing often it's too far apart, which is why you can't see patterns. So if sometimes you're able to compress the speed that you can run these tests in tighter sequence, you'll see the pattern faster. We oftentimes just can't see the pattern. So that's why it might feel like a waste, but it's because we're doing the step or the action too far apart. This should be easier. One way I look at this is looking at life as an obstacle course. And there's always an obstacle course. And the key insight on the obstacle course is that you can't see it until you play. And the obstacle course is rarely repeating. There might be similarities, but think of it as a constantly changing obstacle course, but you can't see it until you play. So this notion of when you think it should be easier, no, your expectation is to think that there is no obstacle course. When you start to realize there's always an obstacle course, you can't see it until you play, you start to look at that differently. When you think of emotionally heavy, anger, sad, fear, worry, and then complacency, when you get overwhelmed, this notion of recognizing that's not helpful to your thinking. How do I see that in detail? And often, I think we brought Mark Brackett to even talk about these emotions, being able to see it and being able to even be aware of the nuances and details down to like the visual details of what made you angry, sad, that usually ends up being the antidote to be able to kind of calm down the emotionally heaviness before you can start to see it as like, maybe I can look at it differently. The inaccurate weighting, I said before, in the past, we assigned too much meaning to a lot of things in the past. And usually it's what I would call chance momentum. It just worked by chance because those multiple things came together. In the present, it's often too soon to tell. And the key to all this is to build strategic momentum. Strategic momentum is the notion of game planning. So if you are able to invest in taking this pre-work of the past and present and map it out, the ultimate place to go is the red parts of the V3 action in the future. When it's done wrong, you tend to have very few ideas, very few original ideas, and we tend to kind of lack, like, I don't know what to do. The unknown, we can be scared of it or we want to avoid it. And often because you can't explain well what we're trying to get to, what to do next, it's very hard to brainstorm, can't get feedback. The flip side when you do this well is you have a lot of ideas. You have a rich future Eden mapping that you're doing, constantly puzzling. You have a rich list of ideas that is actually looking for better and better ideas. I always think I love kicking out my best thing I want to do next because even a better one came along. That's a great place to be when you have to kick it out. There's an appreciation for the unknown. So you're constantly searching for what you don't know. And that notion of by playing in the obstacle course, by playing in action, you're looking for what you're missing. And things are always missing because things are always changing too. A thoughtful explanation, you'll see when you explain what you're trying to do, the feedback, the reaction is visceral. It's rich. It's energizing. It's sometimes like argumentative. But if you've done the self-challenge, you won't shut down, because in many ways you've had your own argument of looking at an explanation. So when someone is challenging it, you're going to be looking for what part of the challenge did I miss, as opposed to like, yep, like I've thought of all that. You're looking constantly for sort of additive thinking, additive strategy. So that was what I put together, which I feel this is a tough topic, but I feel it's actually a very important topic. And so I believe over time we'll get better at kind of consolidating it. But I don't know if in the chat or in, we can bring it to even just kind of questions here, but anybody online, you want to unmute first? Want to always.
Yeah, Lisa, I know you had a question. If you're still here, you can mute.
And I can jump to a slide or any part.
Go ahead, Monica.
Hi, everyone. Lisa here. Sorry, I'm running to pick up my son, but I loved everything that was being spoken about. And I just feel like, for those of us that are like maybe creating organizations or businesses, this brainstorming strategy is this to be approached for every aspect of the organization. So like, mapping of the mission, mapping of the vision, all the way down to, relations with our participants or our members. And I just feel like there's so many aspects to be brainstorming about. And if you had any suggestions for that.
Yes. So this is the part, actually, I think it's most fascinating. What you said, Lisa, is not uncommon. Everyone wants a better brainstorm of the vision, the mission, and the counterintuitive part. Let me see. So I'm going to go right here. The counterintuitive part is that everyone is fighting and playing in this kind of future and action list, but your ability to best contribute to any discussion is to spend the time to analyze yourself and then your view of any mission. So whether it's the organization you work for, which is the bigger mission, you have many missions within a mission. And so this notion of, if you want to almost go figure out what to do next, you have to figure out where you came from. And it's not just where you came from as in you as an individual, but where your thinking came from, where your judgment this is why I started with this slide here. And I've almost always found there is a part of yourself first. And then you can do these things in kind of like quick tandem, because when you try to work on the mission, you'll see that your own biases will always impact the mission discussion. So oftentimes going into yourself, and you might look back and think of the biggest lessons that you feel you've like paid the price, made a mistake. And so you map those versus think about the greatest successes and map those out and get visual in detail. And you might start to see kind of a matching of different experiences from the past of both the negative and the positive. That's your visceral draft, like as in the default part one. The second part is to look at it and say, what happens if it's wrong? As in, what happens if the meaning I put in what was wrong wasn't accurate? Well, what happens if the success that I'm holding on to, and often you'll see we're trying to replicate that same type of success. What happens if it was too low a standard? It's like success in high school or success in college might not be the success you want now. But if your memory is very strong, we end up chasing something from the past that's too low a standard. So how to challenge that yourself? And that's this notion of default visceral draft first. And by the way, the more you do it, you'll get better. You do it on yourself, you do it on a mission, and then you self-challenge. And so when you go have a discussion with someone, your organization on the mission and vision, instead of starting with a discussion of let's brainstorm on a blank sheet or start where we left off of our mission statements, our vision, our ideas, it starts off by you explaining the mission in your way of how you remember off memory, how we got to where we are. I put over here in the mission, there's many missions, but the word origin story, the origin story is almost like your mental memory of how we got here. Like, what are the good things and the bad things? Where's the momentum? Where's the heaviness? Like, and mapping that out. And if you can explain that in a level of like vivid details of memories of multiple times in multiple places, you will see it's much easier for someone else to react. And when you have that discussion, you will find that the richness of the back and forth is what ends up then lighting up ideas of what to do, ideas of adjusting your Eden or your mission, versus starting going on what to do first, or going at like, like what future success looks like. It tends to be a very weak foundation of pontificating. And I think too many of us have been part of that. You will see that the first versions look messier, and it gets harder to do. But as you get more skilled in this, you will see the richness in debating and brainstorming comes from your ability to explain the past and the current present. And someone else's view is often going to always be different because they've pattern matched it with different things from the past. And so when you have a discussion there, more original ideas of what to do next, more original thinking and kind of the future comes out.
How often are you starting over? Like if you have something you're chipping away at, like you're not coming in every day and starting from zero to how you got the origin story of past, are you? Or
So I think of it sometimes as so for most people, since they haven't, there's almost a lot of initial work. And when you do the initial work, the first versions are all going to feel like you just threw up on the page, right? You threw up on the page when it came to the mission, you threw up on the page even on yourself. And then like imagine taking the oscillation and then re-looking at not everything, and you have to pick. So sometimes you might pick, and we were going through this exercise within the mission, there are circles that I would say are much harder, more complex, and there's some things that are easier. And I was challenging our team, pick two of the easier ones to start on the mission because your skill isn't there. So if you pick the easier one, explaining the origins of how something got here. For example, in building community, we're talking about just the notion of we want adults like getting better at making friends. I know it sounds simple, just meeting each other. And so what have we tried going back in time in how to help people just meet each other? It could be icebreakers. It could be group exercises. But instead of just going generic, it's like looking at a calendar and remembering off memory the things that actually my memory of what we've done and what worked and what didn't work, and just off memory. And the reason why off memory is it's not the accuracy. I am driving my thinking and my decisions off my memory. So I want to see what my off memory version is. That's an example of like something smaller and simpler, right? Like not the more strategic stuff of I want community, add value and help, like make business contacts, life advice coach, like that gets too complex. Just a simpler one, or like we're saying with Tom, with like just food. Want the food experience to be amazing, right? And just pick something simple and then map out the origins off memory, putting timeframes, calendar, and going down to details of what happened, good and bad. You want to capture it because that is what's coming off your judgment, your opinion comes off that memory. Challenge it then, right? Because the nuances of it is maybe like, shoot, we gave up on that one too soon. If you try that more often, it would have resulted in something different. Or maybe there was a nuance that, and so like I was putting in, like there's all these different ways where maybe we like didn't try enough. It would did it too far apart. Like, so there, and there's even the obstacle course. I think of even the idea of just adults meeting adults. I mean, I think of high schoolers, how challenging it is for them to meet and all the negative thoughts they might have of trying to sound cool, don't care. So adults just have a more mature version of that. So what is it? And so to be able to even like kind of think of those examples and think of even your experiences of it down to individuals, it's mapping out details. Don't be afraid of throwing up. And so this coming back to your question, how often do you do it? You will see that when you are very productive, as in the volume is detailed and good, you're more inclined to want to show it to someone. Like the more you actually feel like, shit, I did some hard work here, came up with stuff you want to, and that's where if you've created your draft, challenged your draft, now the action often is showing it to someone. And then remember in this example, like meeting adults, you might show it to a coworker, and then you might show it to one of the people who come to our events. And then you might show it to like people who are friendly to like maybe kind of newer, all the way to like people who are hostile, right? Like people who are the biggest critics of what we're doing. Like imagine just showing it, and in each explanation, you're like refining. Like the way I look at it, when your process of iterating what your game plan and what your thinking is on paper, the reason you end up revisiting it is because there's momentum. The momentum in like understanding it, explaining it, the props, and so momentum makes you go at it much easier. This question of how often do we do it usually comes from lack of momentum, right? Like confusion. There's too much. It's all over the place. I'm 2 inches deep in every thought. That's where sometimes you have to step back and say, okay, of all the things I brainstormed, right? Like, and I put like the missions in circles, pick 2 of the areas that are hardest, because I'm saying I'm not going to touch that. Pick 2 of the ones that are easiest. Let me try to get momentum in the easiest. And we've talked before of oscillating the hard to easy. Try that and then see if you can make progress there, and then go show someone. And that ends up giving you a experience feeling of, oh, that's what success looks like. Now let me try it on the hard thing, or let me try it on, say myself. Monica, you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Charlie. And this was very enlightening for what was my question last week. But I still struggle a little bit with the mission and easy part, because in speaking on a product side of things, apparently MVP seems to be the easy part, like have the really what is the minimum viable product. But what happens when that seems even hard, or maybe we're overcomplicating things, and from there, how do I go to, and I think you clarified that a little bit, like my self pre-work, like it's from that same mission, like let's just say again MVP, which still seems very hard. But if MVP was the easy part, then from there I need to analyze what has been happening there, good and bad, to come up with that self-reflection of what are my negative and positive opinions about that.
So here, I'm going to do this so I can kind of talk on both these things at once here. So I think of what always gets very hard is because my own biases and my own meaning making I've done is part of what's driving sort of how I look at the mission, which is why oftentimes when things do seem too difficult, it's easier to, because it's always like everyone gets to a place of where do you start, right? When you get a tangled web, like where do I start untangling it first? When in doubt, I always go to the self, and just being able to map out a version of myself. And once again, when done right, this exercise of part 1, part 2, there's insights that come out. An insight has oh my God, I never thought of it that way. Or I didn't realize that like I'm driving my opinions, my judgment, and it's driven off of things that might not be accurate and might not even be, it might even be hurtful, as in too opinionated. Experiences I've weighted too heavy in either mistakes or success. And so being able to do that, and then being able to even share that with someone to get reaction, and you'll know when you do it right, where, like I said, the brainstorming, it's almost like their invitation into analyzing you is a free-flowing conversation. They're almost energized and excited. And because you've done the difficult work of not only capturing the top level like memories, but you've challenged it, like there's usually when it's easy for someone to engage with you on that brainstorm you've done, that pre-work was done correctly. So that's one place to start. And the reason is because you might often, and most people are surprised, progress on that on self, then go look at mission will suddenly create different breakthroughs in mission because you're now looking at it with a different lens. Okay, that's one piece. The thing on the mission is this. Mission is complex, usually, even this idea of MVP, because there's so many different pillars that come together to make any mission happen. And so how do I analyze which pillar? We talked about the machine, but it's made up of many machines within. So it's usually just like very difficult to figure out where do I start. It's very difficult to figure out, like when there is success, you're just going to keep feeding it. But when there isn't, it's very difficult to break it apart to understand like what is wrong? Where do I start? Right. And I think this question of that, like it starts with understanding which of the pillars, and you might once again rep on something easier, but to be able to explain how you got here and your off memory origins of, for example, if you built some MVP product, there's a lot of decisions and origin of how you got to that as the thing, whatever that might be. So for you to be able to map out, looking at a calendar, right? If you look back 1 year, look back 2 years, and what do you remember that drove like, the signals of good and bad? Once again, all off memory, don't look it up because that's what's driving your judgment. And then the self-challenging part says, wait, did we read it wrong, correctly? You analyze it, and then you open up for discussion. And that's a more effective discussion with someone on a project than kind of, it's not working, what should we do? That's a very common thing, right? We're not getting the results we want, what should we do? And you end up almost butting heads on like an idea petification, like it's a very ineffective way to brainstorm. Yet that's what we tend to all do. And so it's again, like I want more people to taste the success of this. I was having this conversation last night at dinner that I've seen a lot of our team members tasted when it feels heavy in your thinking, kind of the example Greg shared last week, and you get the right perspective and you feel lighter, which is what I call experiencing good defense. But good offense is when you're like at a place where you don't even know what to do. Through a good brainstorm session, you're like fired up with so many ideas you want to try. And when you try and it doesn't work, it's not like, oh my God, I suck. But it's like, wow, I figured out. You're just like figuring out so much stuff. And so that energy that you feel to move forward, like, which is basically saying the richness of the VX and the V3, the future and the action list, is so rich. It's counterintuitive to know it comes from the thorough skills of repping the past and the present, challenging it, getting reaction on them. So that's what I can't wait for more people to taste that, because once you do, what feels like a waste of time, what feels like reminiscing the past, what feels like digging up baggage and old stuff, it can feel like a waste because the urgency to make progress makes you want to focus on what to do next or how to define the vision. And yet, like, we're ineffective in having a discussion because we haven't properly analyzed the past, the present. We haven't challenged it. And when you do that, it's a richer brainstorm that leads to more of what to do.
I knew Aruna had a question.
Sure.
Mute.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I'm learning a lot, and it's also connecting to last week's discussion. My question is, how do you manage different personalities and time? Some have a lot to say and they contribute and can monopolize the time in the discussion, and this can sometimes prevent good ideas from being shared.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. And the other thing is, the second point is, Also, in brainstorming with creative people, sometimes this leads to each meeting being about the fun of coming up with a new idea in the brainstorming session itself. And it actually can lead to less reflection and examination of the past, and just how to sort of push oneself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. So the first question, the personalities, the easiest way I think of kind of ranking personalities, I think of there's a couple different ways you can look at it. You can look at it as danger versus safer. You can look at as, maybe it's annoying or kind of like helpful. The notion of, instead of A, B, C ranking, A being the best, C being the worst, usually the best way to rank anything is kind of C, A, B. And the reason is pick the worst ones first, as in the worst personalities. And the reason is any list you have, once you figure out the worst, it shortens the list. It's easier to see who the A's are. The place where you'll kind of almost never get it right is in the middle, in the B's. And so then what I generally tend to do is pick the two worst, and I'm saving the two worst as later gates. And I'm picking the two best to start with. Because what ends up happening is your brainstorm and whatever you're doing, it's messier and it's more incomplete. It's full of more holes in the beginning. With every iteration, it gets stronger. So save the personalities that are difficult, that are dangerous, that are annoying for later. If you start in the wrong order, you will see yourself lose momentum very fast. So because there's like a duality of, yes, some people are better at helping you advance your idea. Some people are worse, but even the worst ones can have a role to play. If your idea and your strategy and game plan is stronger, even those who are dangerous, who are difficult, will actually be able to add value. But before you get there, your plan has to get stronger, which is why, how do I start my iterations? And knowingly starting in not large group brainstorming, but smaller group, approaching the A's first so that let it iterate. Then eventually you'll find a whole bunch of B's in the middle. It doesn't even matter what order the B's are. And then you're trying to build up to your C's. And I think one of the things people make a mistake of is avoiding the C's. The reason why the C's are important is that your thinking and your game plan has to be that strong that you can even win over C's. The people who are dangerous, the most critical, the most annoying, even they will add value. And so that's how much better your plan will get. The second part of your question, I think the fun new idea is the unlearning that we have to do. The belief that like good brainstorming has a lot of jokes, has a lot of Play-Doh, silly putty, different things. And it's like almost a creative session that we all left energized with so many original thoughts. It's the wrong way to think of it. The way I think of it instead is it's upon me to do the pre-work, because the single biggest ingredient of a good brainstorm is yourself. And you doing your own pre-work can engage anyone into a good brainstorm. So in this case, when you rank your A, B's, and C's, see, even that I have agency in controlling how I'm going to iterate my brainstorm. From people who will help to the people who will, even the C's have a place to play. But the notion of being able to invite people into the depth of it's almost like if you think of yourself as like AI on one hand, it's like my training data. I want to expose my training data. And to think that my training data is perfect is you can imagine very flawed. And because as it comes out, when you see your default visceral, our immediate reaction is going to be able to like cover it up. And so we're talking about this notion of swirling, right? You're real-time challenging as it comes out, as opposed to no, you should genuinely be curious. I want to know what comes out, right? Good, ugly, bad. I need to see it. I need to see it because whether I realize it or not, that is what's driving every reaction, every judgment. Like I've already made enough meaning. It's almost like when a baby is born might not have a lot of meaning made, but by the time we're adults, there's so much stacked up meaning that to be able to understand what is coming out and what is in there and then to be able to self-challenge it and to realize that is an ongoing practice. And so when you even talk about reflection, you will get to a place where real-time reflection is such a vital element because you start to appreciate the dangers of how rapidly a tiny experience just gloms on and gets just put into my file system. And so like Megan and I will joke that we will have a meeting or experience something for 1 hour, but we can reflect for 8 hours on that 1 hour meeting. And the level of nuance and detail, because every little piece pulls back our data bank of experiences that we're attaching to it, we're interpreting. And so when you start to see, holy shit, 1 hour can be seen that way, and you think of how little we do of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just stacking in the files without doing that type of real-time reflection. And so the process of doing it, you'll see, it's not going to be very effective until you go through enough reps of it. I would generally say, think of doing it at least 3 times, even on yourself. Think of it doing 3 times on a focused, like maybe easy mission before you might say, okay, something of value might be there. Expecting it to be good and valuable from the first time, it's just too messy. It's too much throw up.
Mhm. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Ben?
Yeah. So there's two questions or 2 different things. Well, maybe they're correlated, but I think it tags back onto the people that are, dangerous, critical, and, annoying really, and can probably bring heaviness to, to even the mission
Yeah.
itself.
Yes.
In the new Brainstorm, since you kind of push them to the side, I agree. Sometimes you just want to start light, fresh, and
Yeah.
wouldn't it be more effective, or should it be that we actually address the heaviness first and forego as talking about the past and try to correct the personality behavior, or I don't know, is that effective to actually address the heaviness at that thought person? And
I can't, tell me if I'm following your question correctly. The problem is our discussion of a difficult topic is magnified when you do it with someone who is already difficult with,
right,
which is why we need people that I can have more difficult. And so first, we tend to have difficult conversations only to ourselves, right?
Okay.
With ourselves. And so this is where it's a tangled mess in our head. And the act of having to, but there's something, it's very powerful. It's very similar to teaching. Like the more you have to explain yourself, the better you get at explaining anything.
Okay.
And so the heavier a topic it is, it's harder to explain. And so when you add a variable of someone who's really critical or someone who's difficult on top of something that's already hard to explain, you'll see it, you get burnout. It doesn't, you get no return, which is why there's a notion of like, I have to first be able to see it, because I don't want to see like my heavy thought out loud with someone for the first time.
Yeah.
Because then we get very reactionary, almost to a defensive level. And it's not good. And that reaction can be instant denial or instant agreement. Yeah, I agree. And neither one is correct. My point.
Exactly.
Like that type of like visceral correction with someone tends to usually be all about playing nice, all about avoiding conflict, all about avoiding looking dumb. And that's not what is going to help you win. Like looking smart, looking, like I have no issues doesn't help you win. Like getting the right detail analyzed is going to help you win. So when I think of this heavy topic, I think of kind of trying to get this draft sort of like default, self-challenged, and then show it to someone who's easier. Now, the reason why the dangerous critical person is always important is that the best ideas, the best, mission, the best products, whatever you build, can pass the test of the critics, right? Can pass the test of the dangerous people too, because that's when you know the idea is that good. Versus like, it only works with my friends. It only works with people who love me and support me no matter what. There's sometimes too much kind of like niceness and coddling baked in, but as your idea, that as you get better at explaining it, you will see that like you'll build the courage to want to find like almost critics. You want someone, like you can get to a place where you want someone to tear apart what you're working on
Right.
because you want to see what you can't see.
That's good. And well, sorry, is there another?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
And the other one, and so coming in prepared. The other thing is how often, because everything takes time, right?
Yeah.
And so how often is it recommended as an exercise? Because it's a great exercise. How often? I guess we've been doing it once a week.
Yeah.
And the idea of starting over feels it's actually kind of true every time. But yeah. So how often is that?
So when I think of the two most important points kind of in practice, Monday morning and Friday morning tend to be very interesting, kind of different windows. Meaning if you brainstormed effectively on the things that you believe will move the needle, right? And then as a result of it, you actioned. And remember, you do have to move. You can't just brainstorm. You have to action.
Yeah.
And sometimes the action in the brainstorming is actually just being able to get reaction from other people that improves that idea. Because you'll see with reaction comes like a desire to go and try something. The problem is when you're only isolated in your own thought, like you kind of lack ideas. You lack like action items. But as you show it to someone, you'll see, oh, that's a good idea. I want to test that. And so you might push it out to people. And so when you do the Monday morning part, right, you end up doing stuff that will give you signal, reaction, good, bad. If you do that, then Friday, which is kind of when the week technically ends for most people, gives you a different way to think about. Like, so Friday ends up being brainstorming, but has a lot more reflection on what happened.
Okay.
And so that pairing of Monday is almost like kind of it's almost like if every business plan had a new start Monday morning. You're starting with, what do I want to get done? And you're more like amped up with energy because you see also and feel a runway of the whole week in front of you. By Friday, it's the end. So there is a sense of either accomplishment or not. And then if it's not, what are the key lessons and what are the, we took shots and we learned like that doesn't work. And what is it? Like, so there's more of a reflective brainstorm Friday versus Monday. But what you'll find is these are just almost like the training wheels on how to start. You'll get to a place where you almost realize when I do something, it's going to be like very rapid action, tight sequence. So most of the time you're like puzzling, brainstorming. You're trying to get like people to like react and rip apart and tear into your thinking. Because if you can get that better, you will see the sequence of what you do is rapid. So like it ends up being almost like an ongoing thing at some point.
And but that's interesting. So something comes out of the brainstorm. Everything is actionable. Everybody's going to do the action, and then you have the next brainstorm, and it's pure resistance as to why all these things that were really actionable were not, effectively done.
But when I think of like, but I think of actionable, I think of as everything's a thesis, right? Everything's a thesis that I think that like that if I try that, like this would happen. And you go try it and you find out that's not what happens. So like when you have more theses, you have like I love having to drop things that as much as I want to do them, I have something better that I want to try first. Or like it's like closer in proximity to like what's happening, people in my life. So like sequence ends up mattering a lot in this. And usually because people don't have a lot of ideas of what to do and they're stuck, like sequencing isn't even a discussion. It's like, I don't have really many ideas and I don't have fresh ideas. I'm stuck on the same thing. And so that to me is the signal that the brainstorming is ineffective and bad, but it's bad because you haven't spent the time doing the pre-work to understand kind of what your off memory views of everything is. So
Clear.
Other questions here, or I'm going there? And anybody on Zoom can unmute?
Try this is Greg.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot. One of the things I was just struck with is, for like a long time, I thought that today was really good. I thought it was really tight around concepts like, I mean, you've talked for a long, long time of the importance of like your intuition being real and brainstorming and like getting that out. The kind of the topics around this like messy middle and how there's gold in there. And sometimes they can feel, even as you apply kind of the brainstorming, it can feel a little bit vague. And I feel like that maybe as I've been practicing this more too, I feel like what you were sharing today kind of starts to put some words and some approaches to like what that means in a more practical sense of, because when you put your project, I'll give it for instance, if you put a project together, I mean, maybe I'll just give my own, it's like you can stay kind of intellectual about like, all right, what's happened kind of in the past, your ideas for the future. And to your point, it can get hard to react to because you're not bringing people into it. You can sound more certain. You're kind of hiding the mess, or you're just not talking to it. So I think to me that part around heavy, for instance, is almost like a permission to like start to explore where I may not have words to it, but it's like kind of tied to emotions. It ping pongs back to the past because it's there. I found it powerful when, that one question of like, I think there was, I forget exactly who was saying it, but the kind of with the, maybe it was Aruna of with like the group and doing that, where I find it powerful of like, even in a small group that you've gone through something together, being able to like go through the past, go through the heavy is powerful because different people put different perspectives on it. And then you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that. You start to see the signals of like, gosh, we're talking about kind of logical, what to do next, yet we're all interpreting that we're bringing kind of our own baggage to it. So we're not having real conversations. Like it makes me think of the, that Raptor 1, 2, 3 example you have. It's like, we're kind of talking in Raptor 3 level, but yet we're all bringing our own version of Raptor 1. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah.
I feel like
the thought that I had is this: as you rep this, where you want to get to, like the real advanced skill is, and you've seen this where like you're able to share your default visceral reaction live on anything. Even when like it might be completely wrong, but it's just kind of like you get more comfortable in exposing that part. And then instead of like self-correcting it as it comes out, you let others react to it, because at the end of the day, that is what's going to drive your judgment and decision. So I want to see it. I want other people to see it. And then you get their reaction, but because you have also just repped enough self-challenging, when you put out your visceral, you're not worried about looking like an idiot. Yeah. You're not worried about like kind of, when someone's like, how could you think like, no, but forget how could I think that? That is what I'm thinking, right? Yeah, and you're actually just getting very good at feeling enough confidence to put it out on the table and then making it almost open season for the group to help change it, and challenge it. And because I've practiced the rep of challenging it, I can live correct my models, my mental models, my examples. And someone is repped in this, you'll see they say something and then they actually change their opinion live. And it's not just fake, it's genuine. They're like, holy shit, that's so like, and you can see like the weighting they have of how they change it. Like, and that's an experienced person to brainstorm with. And you'll see the speed that you can navigate the stuff, which is why I pull this up, Greg, because like, the self-challenge lowers your certainty. It like lowers the certainty on your own thinking and your own memory, on your own experience, which is actually the very skill you need to like learn to learn. If you want to learn to improve your thinking and you want to keep updating your mental models, you have to realize I'm walking around with certainty. which is, by the way, just human nature. So be proud of the fact that it's there, and that's how just we operate, right? I mean, we are wired to like attach the meaning, boom, boom, boom. And then, it's just lazier and easier to walk around, not analyzing it, but we're all doing it. And then the second part is like when you strengthen that self-challenging muscle, you end up strengthening your ability to model upgrade faster and faster. And you'll see the better you are at it, it also invites others to feel more comfortable challenging you. So as a result of it, it accelerates even further. The worse you're at it, you're very hard to challenge. As a result of it, you don't challenge it, but nobody else really challenges it. And the unfortunate part is behind your back, if they ever had a conversation, they'd say, God, if Laura just did this, or sometimes the cursory level stuff, is only the beginning. And even that they won't tell you the truth on. So this notion, Greg, of just, you get to a place where the whole thing occurs real time.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that notion of almost a litmus test of how light you feel being, exposing kind of your certainty, exposing kind of the kind of the complexities, but yet your own ideas of kind of about it, knowing it is, I think is a great litmus test of where you're at in this process and the skill.
And the reason I showed this was when you realize just how difficult B and C is, right? In no way is it easy. I mean, to be able to generate momentum, I mean, you have to string together the right calls, in a row, right? In a focused direction, and the speed of it. And you'll see that if you do it with rapid succession, you will generate momentum faster. But a lot of us will do it once, and then you'll wait a month, and then you'll do it again. And you'll wonder why there's no success. Is because there's no momentum.
Yeah, but there's that exhaustion that comes to a point. If you're always the generator, then and I guess it's the oscillation you're talking about. There's the exhaustion. Isn't that sense of urgency? Don't you need to incorporate an endurance in it?
So yes, but I guess before I even go there, I think of the fact of the ability in the last class to generate momentum is a human skill. I think when it's not, we walk away thinking it's all dependent on having the right teammate. So everyone obsesses on hiring or finding the right partner, or the right brainstorm person, or we obsess in situations, right? There's only certain situations that I can succeed in, or we come up with a bunch of variables. If it isn't a good idea, if I'm not passionate about it, we attribute it to all the wrong places versus just the ability to generate momentum in any area is a human skill. And once I refine that skill, there's an interesting part where you kind of feel like I could put my time into anything and just make something happen. And now you become the MVP for anybody else wanting to get your thinking and your brainstorming on anything they work on. Because if I can get you interested in what I'm working on, I know your skills will help me get success. That's the human skill.
That's cool. Okay.
And so how do I build that? Then comes okay, I'm saying yes to everything. So then we'll go into a whole class on how to say no. Okay. But first is knowing that I could make anything work. And that's the skill to build first. Versus I think we attribute too much of it as wrong team, wrong idea, wrong situation.
But how and self-fatigue, or I'm going specifically back into momentum, and then there's this time, the lag time in between you generating. I don't know, maybe not specific enough, but it really resonated when you talked about when you reflect back and you're saying, oh, well, I had this going, then I had that going, then didn't go. Mm-hmm. But then it's true that if you just keep the momentum going, something comes through. But the reason why it didn't go is that at least the person is the generator of the momentum.
Yeah.
I guess it's finding allies in that, or being able to maybe sleep over it and realize that things are okay. And
so when I think of even finding allies, that's part of like sort of the what to do next. Sometimes finding allies is part of it, right? Like when you generate momentum, you end up attracting. Usually, when there is momentum, you end up attracting allies. When there is a momentum, it feels like you're asking someone to do you a favor, or you have to pay them to do something, and you'll find even then they won't get it done right. And so, like, it's easier to build on that trajectory. So even finding allies, finding, can you be a captain of this? And can you, like, there's generally excitement when there is momentum. And so the whole key first to generate momentum, though, is it starts with that brainstorming, the planning, the thinking.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is most people's thinking is very shallow. It's actually not very exposed. It's very, kind of just idea debating, right?
Yeah.
Vision debating. But like we all have a view of like where momentum or even stuckness has happened, and yet it's not accurate. And so I need to be able to see what my view is, challenge it, and then I'm like ready for kind of mind-to-mind combat with another human being. I would argue it's usually when you're ready also to collaborate with AI versus looking for somebody else to solve that problem for you. That's the whole helpless victim mindset. It gets there too quick.
That's funny. That's a good one.
So, and that by definition is high agency versus low agency, right? You can make stuff happen. It's always like it's a self skill. All right. I think the next leadership in practice is January 8th. It's a TK. Right. So test kitchen with Danny, we'll learn in food. And then, so Mega and I will be back, I guess, the January 15th. So we will not see you for around a month on the leadership in practice, but hopefully you will have a lot of challenges for real life stuff that you can bring. And Megan will be back. She's back tomorrow. So I'm kind of like, I was explaining, I've had to go through this painful process of building such a decision. Like we're like, I hate to say two terrorists, but we're like a cell of two making decisions and judgment, and then broke apart for the longest time that I can remember, about 3+ weeks. And so I've had to go through this painful process of dissecting what it's like to generate momentum solo. And so hopefully some of the lessons that came out are reflective of some of that. And then Megan will come back and we'll kind of go back to sort of the.
Did you find it harder to do it solo?
Horribly harder. The difference is even in thinking, it's an easily 90% reduction in just the speed of getting challenged and correcting. So to cycle in your own thought and not get to breakthrough, I think I'm used to the tempo that is so much higher. So it literally felt like I was not moving. Even though I was moving stuff, it felt like.
So it impacted the momentum.
Yes. So I'm excited for Megan to come back, and she's been reminding me, I'm not going to solve everything. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. But yes. Less. First week, Kathy said I had the energy of a puppy where the favored parent is gone. So it's like glomming on to, other people. And then by third week, I was a little bit better, right? But still, yes.
Cool.
Anyways,
Thank
all right, you guys. If we don't see you, have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, and Happy New Year. And yes, 2026 is coming quite fast, obviously. But they always say on the New Year's resolutions and all the stuff, whatever you want to do, you should start now. The danger is when you think I'll start January 1, it never works. Yeah. So anything you want to do, you want to start sooner, including learning to be a better leader, a better brainstormer, a better, momentum generator, right? So yes, with that, guys, I will see you guys in the new year with my favorite parent in the class. I don't know what happened to Sylvie. She may have given birth. She's gone. But all right. Thank you, everyone.